Hello, everyone. Welcome to this channel. This is Shola Abulu and Associates Learning Channel, and my name is Shola. This is my channel, and thank you for joining me today. We're going to be talking today about public relations and communications, understanding the basics. And thanks to all those who watched the earlier videos that we posted on business continuity planning and crisis management. If you haven't seen it, please check it out, as well as the first one, which was actually a recording of our first webinar, which was on Introduction to Strategic Communication. So Shola Abulu and Associates is a strategy and communications consulting firm, very new, but led by myself with a lot of experience in those areas, strategy, reputation, risk management, communications, organizational effectiveness, and all that sort of thing. So on this channel, you're going to be getting a lot of webinars, 30 minutes mostly, around this, just talking about this sort of thing and sharing, our learnings on those areas that I have mentioned. So we're talking about understanding the basics of public relations and communications, and let's get right into it. We have just 30 minutes. I'm going to try and cover it up. So the backstory to why we did this, or I decided to do this, was because I was getting a lot of questions in my last webinar around what does this mean? I mean, public relations and communications, what's the difference between the two? And it made me think, and I started off as a public relations practitioner. I have then dovetailed into communications, sort of like full-time. And I think as I felt there are differences. Sometimes people use the terms interchangeably, but it's not really supposed to be. So there's actually a difference between PR and communications. And I talk a bit about that in this seminar. So if you're somebody you're a practitioner, or you just have interest, or you've always just wondered, or you're thinking of getting into this, or you're a business leader as well, or an organizational leader, I think this is just general information that we need to know, so that you know when you need a PR practitioner as opposed to communications. And I think this session is important to people in the public sector as well, because I think so many times what we need is actually a communications professional or expert, particularly when it's crisis or issues management communications. And then we hire a PR person and it all goes wrong, because building relationships and communicating are two different things. And that's what we're going to talk about. So we're talking about, this is very much understanding the basics. So bear in mind, again, like I always do on these webinars, I try to compress like 20 years of learning into like 30 minutes. So this is just, an appetizer for those of us who really want to get a sense of what it's all about. So, I do recommend that you should read up subsequently if you still have interest. There's so much, information on the internet, and I'll be sharing some of that today, some of the things I got on the internet, as well as my own experience and expertise along this line. So let's go on the journey of understanding the very basics around public relations and communications. So the session outline for today, so first of all, I'm going to give an intro into what public relations is, and then I'll talk a bit more about communications practice, which is my thing, as I've said. I mean, let me just get that out of the way. I am passionate about communications. I live, breathe, and drink communications. I could do it for free, but thank goodness, to God be the glory, I am also being paid for it, but otherwise I would do it for free anyways. So areas of specialism, jobs and careers as well, and yeah, okay. So yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about. So public relations, three aspects. And this one, I went onto the internet and I was trying to find how do people define public relations in terms of, so I wanted to differentiate between how I have seen it experienced and how people, sort of like experience it and how it's defined. And there was a plethora of definitions on the internet. And I think one thing we can all agree on is that the public relations practice has evolved over the years. It continues to evolve. So starting from the early days when people just defined it as a way in which you relate with your publics or your stakeholders, some people later on said, okay, it is how you deal with people. Some people even also think it's about how you manage relationships, and others also say it's about how again, some have given a sort of negative slants to PR, and that whole concept of seeing it as a spin. And I think the purpose of today and this session is really to bring the context of what public relations is as opposed to what it is not, and what it should be, and what it is in terms of how people view it and how it is practiced when it works and when it is done by companies, organizations, particularly in a credible and by credible institutions. So the first definition, this one I got this from the Institute of Public Relations in the UK, and it says, the way organizations, companies, and individuals communicate with the public and media to create and maintain a positive image and create a strong relationship with the audience. And that's their definition of public relations. So I highlighted the keywords there. You notice that communicates, we find that in the public relations, in that definition, it talks about the public. So public means, general publics, and then as well, groups within the publics. So that could be NGOs, it could be communities, it could be anything, and media. And it says, the essence of that, the outcome or the desired outcome is to create and maintain a positive image and create a strong relationship. Please, can we hold that thought about relationship with the audience? So you are communicating with an audience with the view to creating a relationship. That's public relations from the definition of, from the perspective of IPR. And I think that's a good definition to work with, or a perspective to work with. So if you then go to the next definition that I have here, which is from PR Daily, and that one goes as follows. Sorry, let me move this screen. Yeah, I moved it. So that one goes as follows. The management function, and this is from PR Daily, this was a blog. So I've gotten from Institute, getting from a blog, and then another one from the academics. So the blog definition says, the management function of researching, engaging, communicating, and collaborating with stakeholders in an ethical manner. Please notice the ethics. Yeah, yes. Ethical manner to build mutually beneficial relationships again and achieve results. And then the third one, which we got from scholars, Gronig and Hunt, and this is the most widely used definition, by the way. I found this in several sites, people, slicing and dicing it, but generally saying that PR is the management of communication between an organization and its stakeholders. So I found it interesting, though, that all three definitions had communicate in them. But my favorite definition, I don't know if you can guess which one it is. Actually, my favorite is the number 2, because I think that one resonates more with my own experience and what I have seen. And it's a management function, and everybody is aligned on that. So management can be management of a brand, it can be management of a business, management of an organization. So whether you are a profit-making entity or you are a non-profit-making entity, you have a management, if you have a management team, then you need PR at some point. I mean, if you are big enough to have a management team, then you do need PR at some point, and that's that. So that management function of researching, it starts off with research. And I'm a strong believer on that. If you check the webinar on Introduction to Strategic Communications, we talked a lot about that, understanding your audience, analyzing. So research, you find out about your audience, then you engage with the audience, you communicate with the audience, actually communicate/engagement, and then you collaborate. That's a very strong part of PR, because it's not just about saying, it's about doing, it's about working with. You work with those stakeholders in an ethical manner to build mutually beneficial relationships. You try and arrive at a win-win in an ethical way. But it's about relationships. The end game is relationships in public relations. So I think that's my best definition. And Gronig and Hunt took a sort of like management of communication. They just said communication. And I guess, well, yes, but I think this definition, in my view, is more for corporate communications. And I think the other two are more for PR, and that's my view, because PR is very heavily about relationships. And when we go on in the slides and the presentation, you'll see why I say so. And that has been my own experience as a practitioner, a PR practitioner for about 25 years now. So PR/communications. Now I'm a communications specialist. I have an MBA, so I do also have some experience in strategy as a business leader as well, organizational leadership, organizational effectiveness. Those are other areas in which I also, function and all of that. But a lot of, in terms of my professional expertise on a sort of like specialist level, it's very much on the communication side as well as strategy, which have been very, so all of that thinking I bring into the way in which I do my work. But then in terms of public relations, what I see very strongly here is the relationship element is the big differentiator from my perspective. So looking at PR again, and I got this, and you can see the credits there. I got this from some very interesting sites, so you can also go and check them up afterwards. And this is a list I got from simplycable.com, talking about the types of PR. It was interesting to see how, other people view public relations, and as opposed to the way in which I've experienced it. But I have put it down here, and I like to use not just what I have experienced, but what is also out there, so that we sort of like get a sense of that this applies, whether it's in a certain part of the world or the other. Even though I have worked a lot of my working life in one part of the world, but also in several parts of the world as well. But these are generic, ways in which public relations shows up across the planet. So yeah, this is very relevant generally. So that's why I have put it here. So media relations, which all of us know, which is how you relate with the media, traditional media, online media, which have become very strong in recent times. Government relations, how you relate with the government, depending on what kind of organization you have, and the role that government plays in terms of determining how your organization, your business or brand functions. Community relations too, also very important, depending on how big your organization is. It can even be you have a water production business. You need to relate with your community, because when your trucks are coming in, and when the sound of your generators are running, it's affecting the community. So how you relate with them, if you are proactive about it, that could also save you a lot of heartache, if and all of that. And if there are issues, eventually you then have a foundation to stand on, because you have already built the relationship before the issues came up. That's the whole essence of public relations. It's really about building a relationship with an important stakeholder, so that you have a bank of goodwill for that time when you need to withdraw from it and spend it and use it for the benefit and for the fulfillment of the purposes of that company. So and it shows out, and you can all see, and a stakeholder, definition of a stakeholder is anyone who has interest or influence in your organization. And this is a very important definition, because I think many organizational leaders and business leaders, they think that the only people that they're accountable to are their shareholders, and they then wonder, or their customers and employees. But then when people on social media take up an issue, and you look at that person, A, he's not your customer, 2, he's not an investor, 3, he's not government. Meanwhile, he's putting an opinion, and you think you can ignore that person. No, you cannot, because that person, so long as that person has taken an interest, for whatever reason, in your organization and in your business, at that point, that person becomes a stakeholder that you must manage. And depending on the tone and the body language of that stakeholder, it is what will then determine how you will manage that relationship or that issue in which that stakeholder has taken an active interest and is now influencing even public opinion for or against you, as it may be. That is all in the realm of public relations. And these are the kind of issues that public relations people try to manage. So community relations, customer relations, very, very important. And I think our marketing people know very much about this. And I think this is a potential opportunity area where I think a lot of businesses and brands miss it. We forget that a customer, is somebody that has a network of influences, and a very bad experience with that customer can have far-reaching influences beyond even that little incident that you have. So really building up skill or officers or people who can really help with that customer relations is something that should be actively done. Too often, I think the PR training piece is lacking in these customer relations, and we think we can just pick people off the streets and throw them into those roles. I mean, what you are doing is you are eroding your bottom line. So this is a professional practice area. There's an element of public relations that actually fits into the customer relationships, because these people are your interface, and most of the time they're the first people that we meet, whether it's on a phone line, whether it's at the door, at the reception, that sort of thing. Investor relations also, and those are for people who have, like people that are quoted on the stock exchange mostly and have big investors. You could be global investors, they could be local, country, national investors or whatever. But once you have those high level investors running your organization or involved in your business or your brand, then you need to have people who will manage the relations with those investors. And I see a lot of people falling through the cracks on this, whereby there are issues in the media that come out that is relevant to your sector. You don't proactively engage the investor. It is until when the investor calls you that and that's very bad practice. But if you have somebody who is looking at your investor relationships proactively, that person is scanning the media, is scanning everything. Immediately they pick up on a news item that they believe should be relevant or may have created a negative perception about your industry or your sector, that person already knows that they need to reach out to the investors and tell them that, no, that thing that you read does not affect us in any way. We're not impacted, blah, 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 and all of that. And you don't have to wait until when your investor calls you. That then, gives you have a loss of confidence and trust there, and the investor becomes a bit more jittery about their investment in your country, in your company. So proactively, companies that are big enough and have, that sense of aware, and they do have people proactively watching over that relationships, monitoring the headlines, and making sure that the investors are kept comfortable beyond the financial risk reporting, which is another thing. Most businesses, brands, big ones particularly, and in my home country, they're only managing financial risk, but reputation risk, nobody's managing it. Investor trust, confidence building risk, nobody's looking at it. It's your investor relations person that will be doing that for you. And like I said, big companies, big brands, multinationals understand this, but I don't think some of our local national brands, I don't think understand this as well, which is why you see when little incidents like, fire incident, wherever, is affecting your share price. Yes, it's because the confidence building is not as proactive as it could have been. Internal communications, yes, and this is another function type of PR, but you now see the difference between those ones that they are calling them relations, and then you now say internal communications. Now, internal communications is employees' communications to people within an organization. And why we don't call it employee communications is because not everybody internally may be an employee. You may have contract employees, contract staff working with you. You may have contractor staff. That's people from third-party contractors working in your organization, but they're still within your organization. They're on your premises. They are doing work for you. Therefore, if it's safety information, for instance, you need to give it to them. So we call it internal communications because it's communications that goes inward. And marketing communications is therefore the communication that is around the communications around your business and your brand, which is to the purpose of actually, marketing that product or service so that people can ultimately buy and purchase them. So those are the main types of PR that we say. And of course, you can see that there's a big difference. And then most of us specialize in one area. I started off in government relations before I dovetailed into corporate communications, and that's not a very common trajectory, but yes, it happened to me. I started off with government relations, then moved into strategy and planning, and then into corporate communications. So functions of public relations, and you see all of that there. I'm not going to read it. Product publicity, press relations. You can look at that, as you at your own pleasure and your own time. But I want to draw attention to what is at the bottom there. And what I've tried to do there, because I'm still going to go and talk about the difference between PR and communications. And what I would say this is my own view here, and you can feel free to disagree with me if you want. But I believe that in public relations, the one thing that it does, it creates awareness. And so in some cases, you are doing PR for the purposes of awareness and you use the media for that. Sometimes it's PR for advocacy, and therefore you're dealing with government. So you're going to advocate. There's a policy that is coming out, and you want to advocate and make sure that it is a policy that actually enables your business to thrive or does not impinge on it in a way that would be injurious, not just to the sector, but to the economy, to jobs and all that sort of thing. So you advocate. And like I said, this is all ethical. So let's not have in mind, something that is unethical. There is a very ethical way to relate with government, which is why we have public hearings at the National Assembly, and all of that is for us to, contribute our voice and our thought leadership to the decisions and the regulations and the policies that government is coming up with. So very legitimate, very credible space of work there. And a lot of companies, I think, need to put more attention to this so that when some of these big tickets and organizations as well, I would say, so that when some of these big ticket policies are going through, you actually have people who are following through first hearing, second hearing, and it's not when things become signed on that we then find out and then we have an aha moment and we realize that the thinking of our organization or our business or our brand hasn't been put in. That's not really best practice. Best practice is being proactive and having people to look at it as a full-time job. And like I said, the bigger your organization is, the bigger your brand is, the bigger your business is, the more you will have to upfront begin to invest in people that can actually support you with this. But if you are waiting for when problems come, that is not really the way to go. So advocacy, very legitimate role, mostly in the government relations space as well. And promotion, sometimes you can also do customer advocacy, but that's a different thing. Promotion, that is marketing, communications, and all aspects of PR. Persuasion, yes, that's a very, very valid part of public relations. You're trying to persuade people either to your point of view about your product, about your service, about, whatever it may be. You're trying to convince people, bring them to a point of sales, or actually to just buy into your product, or, or to just welcome its presence if it's to government and all that. But relationships, I have put that in a different color because that is what I think is the strong differentiator of PR. Everything that PR does hinges on the ability to build a relationship. And I think that's why, people that work in PR and that are very much focused on PR, will have to be people who are able to build relationships. So beyond what you say and how you do it, how you work with people in such a way that you earn their confidence and, they are willing to work with you and work with the brand or work with the organization and all of that. So we have people looking at that and trained and skilled to build those relationships on behalf of the business, on behalf of the brand, on behalf of the company. So now we go into corporate communications, and you notice that corporate communication is seen as a function of PR. So, like I said, every PR person, every corporate communications person must have a PR background. But not every PR person will be a communications person, because clearly, as we can see, there are different ways in which PR functions. So many times we go in with that baseline PR thing, and then we specialize in our area. So I started off as PR, but I specialized to a very large extent on corporate communications as well as organizational strategy. And that was just my own personal trajectory. And again, everybody, you can choose how you want to do this yourself as well. If you're someone who aspires to have a career or, or a profession in PR, in public relations or communications. So this is corporate communication. And I didn't put the definition there because it's just essentially the ways and the means in which brands, businesses, and organizations communicate with their audiences or their stakeholders in fulfillment of their mission, or towards fulfilling their mission and their objectives. So it's just that, it's the way in which we communicate. We pass our message, we reach out, we connect, we interact, it's all of those things. And what you see here are the different areas of communications. And this is why some people have a view that communications is actually broader than public relations. But it really depends on the way in which you look at it. It's very much a broad scale. And I think I have found out that there's limited awareness, even within the practice as to how broad it is. So there is internal communications, there is external communication. So like I said, the communications within an organization, then there's the communications that is outside of the organization. And that internal communications piece has become even more important in today's world now because of a lot of what has been going on about COVID and the fact that people are working remotely, how we keep people connected. And I'll probably do a separate webinar around that now. It's very much the companies that will be effective and connected are those who are able to keep that internal communication space very well running for a very long period of time. And they actually have a structure for actually keeping their communities engaged. Their employees engaged and connected and productive and effective, even with remote working and the way things are and lockdown and all that. So external is what you push out. Business communication is now what you do to communicate about your business. And that happens, is different from external communication because external communication is PR driven. Business communication is to aid business delivery within your organization. That one is a different thing, and it's about how you communicate. So technical communication. So I have been in situations whereby I have had to help the organization to increase its internal alignment and its internal effectiveness around technical projects and how they understand the understanding within the project team as to how they're going to communicate within themselves amongst a broad set of stakeholders and towards the fulfillment of the company's purpose. These are things that we build special skills to be able to do. The same thing, change communications is a completely different area. If there's a transformation process that you are going through, there's something that you then need to do, a process and protocol you need to put in place to do that change communications over time. That is also something that one needs to work very, very seriously on. Crisis communications is also very, very different. And that is also something that is done in a way that is required, somebody that is managing communications or managing crisis as a communications professional and supporting the organization with that. That takes an ability to be able to manage that over time as well. That's also a separate skill. Risk communications is public health, And that was actually just brought to my attention recently around during this COVID period. And that's also around public health. So you need to be a subject matter expert of some sort, and you understand how to communicate to people so that they know what they need to know to be safe, to all the people around the public health value chain, including the patients and the general population. How you communicate that risk is also another special skill. Development communications is the communications that happens, like in a social enterprise or a social performance setting. So World Health Organization, for instance, United Nations, how do they communicate, the activity that they do? Even corporates that do development or CSR as well, you need to have people who can, take those stories and give it to the audiences that need to know about it in a way that is meaningful for them. Political communication is when you run campaigns, and that one is another animal on its own. I have never done that, and I think I think ethics and that sort of thing really comes to play a lot in when you have to do political campaign. All of this has ethical issues really, because in development communications and whatever, you should make sure that you're only communicating the truth and that you're not over exaggerating impacts where impact has not been felt. But I think in political communications, the risks around that are much stronger, and the, the onus is higher on the PR or the communications professional to make sure that the ethical line is not drawn, and that the information that you're sharing is credible, is authentic, and is actually, a true representation of facts. Marketing, as we know, we already talked a bit about that. So that marketing communication, that's also another specialist area that is, very strong in retail. There's a whole science around how you communicate around your products, how you talk to your audiences, and how you get the value that you need. Crisis communications, again, I think, like I said, I had done a bit about that in my crisis management webinar. I may do a session on that maybe at some point, but I don't know, let's hold that thought. That's also a very specialist field, and not everyone. So even a communications professional will have to be very experience to be able to do all these things, is what I'm saying. Most of us, like if I look at this entire thing, I have done everything here apart from marketing and risk communications and public health. I've done a bit of and political as well. Marketing communications, very limited, but the other things, internal communication, external communication, business communication, change communication, organizational communication, which is around organizational effectiveness, strategy and all of that. Crisis communications, yes, I do that on a daily basis. Very, very strong skills in that area built over time. Risk communications, public health, I haven't done. Development communications, to some extent within, during my career. Political communication, no, not at all. So if someone is going out, you are going to recruit for a communication specialist, you need to know what sort of experience the person has and be very clear about the skills that you need so that you can get in the resource that can help you to solve your own problem. You don't bring somebody who has been running political campaigns to come and solve crisis for you. The person may have the skills, but it may not be relevant because the context which the person has been operating may be slightly different. So I think it's just interrogating and being more aware. So this is just really to build our awareness about the depth and the breadth of the professions. And if you look at the bottom, I'm now, I had shown this for the PR slide as well. So awareness is shared between PR and communication. Advocacy, yes. Communication, the messaging can also build on advocacy. Affinity, I think I would rather put only in communications, not so much in PR, because I think in PR is stronger than affinity. I think it's more like a relationship. But when you're talking about brand affinity, in other words, I feel I sense an affinity with this brand. I don't know, I don't have a relationship, I don't know them, but that affinity, I think communication, marketing communication, change communication, external communication really helps you with that affinity. Then you build on it with PR if you want to build a very close relationship. So promotion, again, communications, promotion, that goes very well. Persuasion, communication too helps you, like change management. If you need to persuade your workers to take on that change that you are bringing on, communications will help you with that as well. But performance is where I would now say that PR and communications, they are very different. So public relations does not help you with business performance. What it helps you do is manages your stakeholders outside and your relationship with them. But your own business performance is not PR you use to tell your employees to perform or help them to perform. Communications for change, communications for performance within your organization is purely a communications delivery, purely. So anyone who is a PR person cannot help you because your employees already, which PR, what spin are you going to be telling your employees? The person has to be able to create a narrative and tell a story around the business opportunity, around the roles of the workers, around what is required of them, what they need to do, how they will contribute, the support the organization will give, the leadership that management will provide, and what's in it for them. You know, that communication for performance is a hardcore communication specialist role. And that also fits into the organizational communication piece. There's so much around that. So when we're doing organizational effectiveness, working very well with HR and other parts of the business, or even, you know, in technical spaces as well, communications to drive performance within an organization is a hardcore communication specialist skills. You must look for communication professionals to deliver that. Don't look for PR people, or don't even think that technical professionals can deliver it as well. It is a specialist skill. So again, if we now want to just look at public relations versus communications and look at both of them and see what is different. This is, I think, my last slide. I'm almost out of time. And so, like I had said before, there are a lot of things that we share between public relations and communications. And the things I have in the middle on this slide are the things that we share together. So audience, we all have an audience that we need to reach to. Every PR person must have an audience or a stakeholder. Every marketing or communications thing or activity will have an audience that is the receiver or the target for that initiative or that project or that outreach. And we need research. We need to understand who the audience is and what does the audience like, what are their interests, what are their concerns. That's what will determine, you know, how we relate with them. And data goes underneath of that. Communications uses far more data than PR, but PR also needs data. PR needs, I think, more of research, but communications needs data. They need both, but communications works with a lot of data. It works well with a lot of data. Tools, we all use tools. So, you know, if it's media, if it's channels, you know, we all have a message. In PR, there's a message you're communicating. Even when you're building relationships, you go with a message, even if it's a face-to-face, town hall, closed door meeting, round table, whatever you call it, there's a message that you're going into that meeting. Otherwise, they're just going to have fun. But if you're going on behalf of an organization, you know, there is a message. Even if all you're going is just, you know, lunch or something, there is a message, there is a tone, there's a body language that you are going with, you know, which is why people in PR, they understand that. So PR is very much an art. If you look at those 4 circles there, and I have relationships there because that's the end game. At the end of the day, what you are managing is relationships. It's not about meetings. It's not about what the outcome of it is. That man is I have this person is on side. You know, there's a win-win. This person is a partner in progress. You know, all of that. So body language, networks, and is an art form, which is why some people, you know, it's not transferable. It's a very personalized skill, and you find out that when people have built relationships with their audiences for a long time, sometimes when they move on to other jobs, there's a bit of a challenge before someone else comes in, because it's very much a personal skill and it's not always transferable. You know, so which is why, you know, organizations really go out to look for individuals who can actually deliver that value for them. So the same thing, and this, you know, whether it's government relations, media, community, that is very much the same. In communications, however, what we trade on most of all is language. First of all, content, that's the first descriptor. So anybody working communications, you have to be a content creator, or you have to be a very good writer. I don't know of anybody that is a communication specialist that does not write and write well. I mean, as in, you can wake up, they can wake you up from your sleep. In 5 minutes, you can churn out a press release. You are that focused. Writing is second nature to you. You understand the use of language. You understand the use of tone. You understand, you know, the science between all of that. Because in communications, and again, this is why we sometimes get into trouble. I have seen within Nigeria, my home country, this environment, where we give PR people, you know, to manage crises and do things that a communications person does, and then they get the tone all wrong. You know, we've seen so many social media messages that have annoyed people, gotten people upset because the use of language, nobody's watching the tone of voice. The content that was shared was completely unsuitable for that platform or for that audience that is on that platform. And there's nobody understanding the science of that. So at the end of the day, you get a backlash and you're wondering, self-inflicted wounds, you know. So I think understanding this differentiation, in fact, I think looking at this slide alone, this for me is what would determine for me, if you have a PR in quotes or communications problem or role, are you looking for somebody that is more of a relationship person or somebody who is more of a communications person, which is content, language, science, and tone. In fact, in many universities in the countries that offer communications as a discipline, it's taught more as a science, particularly in the, I would say, in Europe and in that part of the world. And whereas PR is very much taught like an art. So that's, a very significant difference between the two. So I personally believe that to be a good communication specialist, you have to be somebody that is comfortable with science, you have to be comfortable with data, you have to be comfortable with figures, you have to be somebody that is comfortable in a technical environment to some extent or form, because you will interact with those things to a very large extent. If you are uncomfortable with writing, you're uncomfortable with data, with numbers and that sort of thing, I think you will struggle a bit more in communications, whereas you will coast relatively well in public relations if you are somebody that has, the right, you are someone that you have relationships, you have interpersonal effectiveness, and you know how to deal with people, and of course you know the subject matter of whatever it is that you are representing, or you are, in that role as a PR practitioner. So I think this is my last slide now. Yeah, making good time on this. So this is jobs and careers, and these are different, just an idea of the sort of jobs and careers that you can have for those of us who are still in that space of trying to say, where do I fit in? So I think on the PR side, if you look at the cloud word, the word cloud on your left, there are many opportunities depending on how you started off. And don't stress too much about what your first degree is, because I think PR, public relations and communications, you can really have done anything. It really doesn't matter to some extent, though I know there's some way out degrees that people do. But by and large, mainstream, I think you'll be fine. So you can either, journalism manager, you can become a manager, and of course, for you to be a manager, you would be able to, take a lot of broad information. I would recommend to anybody who wants to go really far in communications, if you're somebody who wants to really go very much into the strategic organizational effectiveness, and business communication space, please consider doing a business course or business degree. I did an MBA, and I think that was a real game changer for me. If you can commit to doing that, fine. If you can't, do get some business or strategy degrees that can help to really put your teeth into that communication, so that when you're in whatever organization context you find yourself, whether it's a construction firm, whether it's a hospital, whether it is a school, whether it is an energy company, whether it is IT, technology, software, you can hold your own. You can, get your lens into the business, understand where the organization struggles, and help them with the communications that they need to become better at what they do, both in terms of performance within the company, in terms of business delivery, in terms of organizational efficiency, and in terms of crisis communications and external communications, if necessary, and of course, internal communications, which, like I have said earlier, is very key at this time, based on the current realities that we're living with. So you will notice that I have put a lot of links here for some of the content that I have picked up on the internet. So I would recommend you to go and read some of them as well if you're looking for more information. And these are our social media handles. As you can see, my email is up there as well. We're a research advisory and consulting firm, like I said, and we do training as well. So if you have training needs on any of the areas that we've talked about, crisis management, reputation risk management, organizational effectiveness and strategy, or you have a business organizational problem that you need some help with, yeah, just give us a shout out. So thank you very much. At this point, I will stop recording. Thank you. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already. Share as well to everyone that you think this would be useful to. Thank you for watching, and see you on my next video. Thank you.